The morning light crept slowly into Evelyn's kitchen, painting the walls in soft gold. She sat at the small wooden table, her hands folded around a cup of tea gone cold. Across from her was the chair that had belonged to her husband, untouched since the day he left this world. Dust gathered on its seat, but she couldn't bring herself to clean it. It felt like the last proof that he had once been here. Every morning began the same way: silence, breath, memory. The clock on the wall ticked faithfully, unaware of how its rhythm mocked her loneliness. The kettle whistled for no one. The radio stayed off. She sometimes caught herself setting out 2 plates, only to realize and smile sadly before putting one away. Habits of love die slowly, she thought, slower than the heart expects. Outside, the world was already moving. Cars passed, children called to one another, a dog barked somewhere down the street. Yet none of it touched her little house. Evelyn lived as though time had forgotten her, as though her home sat on the edge of the world where no sound could reach. She wasn't bitter. She was simply tired, the kind of tired that seeps into the bones, into silence. She had once been full of laughter, a bright woman with stories, songs, and the faith to carry others when they fell. But now even her own reflection seemed foreign. The eyes that had once sparkled with joy were dim, the lines around them carved by grief, not age. She looked at her face and whispered, "So this is what it means to outlive love." Her voice broke before she could say more. When she finally rose from the table, she touched the back of the empty chair and let her hand rest there. "You tell me not to cry," she murmured, smiling through the ache. "You always said we'd meet again." The words hovered in the still air, neither promise nor prayer, just truth remembered by a weary heart. Then she turned away, leaving the chair and its silence to keep watch. The house was full of echoes, not the kind that returned your voice, but the kind that carried the past. Evelyn could almost hear him in the hallway, humming as he searched for his hat. She imagined the sound of his footsteps, steady and sure, the way they used to fill her mornings with comfort. But when she turned, there was only the creak of old floorboards and the whisper of time passing. Memory had become both her company and her torment. She opened a drawer and found his watch, still ticking faintly. The strap was worn, the face scratched, yet it still kept time better than she did. She held it to her ear and closed her eyes, pretending it was the sound of his heart. For a few seconds, it almost was. Then the illusion broke, and she felt the familiar ache of separation return, heavy and sharp. The photo frames on the mantel smiled back at her, frozen joy, unchanging faces, weddings, birthdays, picnics by the lake. She traced the edge of one with her trembling fingers. "You'd laugh if you saw me now," she said softly, still talking to ghosts. The sound of her own voice startled her. She hadn't spoken aloud in days, but somehow the words felt like prayer. Afternoons were the hardest. The sun slanted low through the window, lighting up dust in the air like tiny souls rising. It was beautiful and unbearable all at once. She tried to read her Bible, but her eyes blurred before she reached the second line. "I will never leave you," she whispered from memory, unsure if she was reminding herself or testing if God still listened. That night she left the radio on as she fell asleep in her chair, just to fill the silence. A preacher's voice spoke faintly of hope, of heaven, of promises not broken by death. Somewhere between words and dreams, Evelyn thought she heard her husband's laughter again, faint, distant, and full of peace. When she awoke, the room was quiet, but her heart was not quite as heavy. The days began to blur, one into another. The postman still came, the buses still ran, and the world outside her window seemed determined to keep living without her. Evelyn watched from her chair, the curtain drawn just enough to see. Faces changed with the seasons, new neighbors, new children, new noise. None of them knew her name. Once, she might have waved. Now, she simply observed, invisible in plain sight. Her phone sat on the counter, dusty and silent. It had been weeks since it last rang, months since anyone visited. Birthdays came and went without cards. The few friends she had left were old and far away, each tending to their own loneliness. "We're all just fading," she told herself once. The thought wasn't bitter. It was matter of fact, like naming the weather. One afternoon, she saw a neighbor carrying groceries and almost stepped outside to help. But halfway to the door, she stopped, unsure if she'd even be recognized. The thought of being politely thanked and forgotten again made her heart shrink back. She returned to her chair and watched the light move across the floor, slow and steady, like a clock that no longer needed her. She missed belonging, not just to a person, but to a world that noticed when she was gone. She had once been a teacher, a voice of comfort, a hand others sought. Now she was a shadow in her own story, pages still turning long after her chapter had closed. The ache wasn't anger, it was quiet grief, the kind that whispers, "You don't matter anymore." But that night, as she folded her blanket, she caught herself whispering a reply. "I do matter," she said aloud, softly but with resolve. "Even if no one sees, he must." The words surprised her. They felt alive, as though borrowed from someone else. She didn't know why she said them, only that for a heartbeat they felt true. Morning came again, heavy and slow. Evelyn woke before the alarm, as she always did, though she no longer had anywhere to be. The light through the curtain felt too sharp, too honest, revealing everything she wished to forget. The unmade bed, the dishes in the sink, the empty chair waiting for her downstairs. She sat up carefully, her joints protesting, her spirit quieter than ever. She boiled water for tea and moved through her kitchen like a ghost rehearsing life. The same routine, the same rhythm, but without meaning. Once mornings had been holy, prayer, breakfast for two, the laughter of a shared day beginning. Now they were just tasks: water, bread, pills, silence. She wondered if God still visited homes like hers, small, forgotten, faithful in their loneliness. Her hands shook as she lifted her cup, and for a moment she felt frustrated, not at her weakness, but at her waiting. "What am I still here for?" she asked quietly. The question hung in the air, unanswered but honest. The clock ticked. The world outside carried on, and she felt suspended between time and eternity, unsure which side she belonged to anymore. She opened her Bible again, the one with pages worn thin from years of use. Verses she once knew by heart now blurred together, her eyes wet before she could focus. But one line stood out through the blur. "Even to your old age and grey hairs, I am he who will carry you." She read it aloud, her voice trembling, and for a moment something stirred inside her, faint but real. She set down the cup and closed her eyes. "Then carry me," she whispered. The words were not dramatic, not desperate, just true. And though the room was still, though no sound came in reply, the morning felt a little lighter, as if her simple prayer, soft as breath, had been heard after all. A thin envelope arrived one grey afternoon, marked with her name in bold, impersonal letters. Evelyn recognized the government seal before she even opened it. A pension notice, perhaps, or another reminder of paperwork that didn't care about people. She placed it on the counter beside the others and stared at it for a long while. The world still sent her mail, but not messages that mattered. Nothing inside an envelope could tell her she was loved. The paper waited there all day, silent and accusing. She made tea, washed dishes, folded towels, anything to avoid touching it. It seemed almost alive, humming with cold authority. Finally, as dusk fell, she tore it open. Just as she suspected, it was a notice. Numbers, forms, deadlines. "We regret to inform," it began, though what it regretted was unclear, words pretending to care. She read to the end, folded it neatly, and placed it in a drawer. "Another reminder I exist on paper," she said softly. It wasn't anger in her voice, only fatigue, the kind that comes from being seen only by systems, never by souls. She thought of the letters she once received from her husband, handwritten, full of warmth. Now, no one wrote like that anymore. That night she took one of his old letters from her box and read it again. The ink had faded, but the love hadn't. "Don't ever forget," he had written once, "that you are seen even when alone." She smiled faintly, tracing the lines with her finger. How strange, she thought, that paper from decades ago could feel more alive than what arrived today. She placed the old letter on top of the new one and closed the drawer. "I'll keep the right kind of words closer," she whispered. Outside, the wind sighed softly against the window, as if agreeing. She turned off the light and went to bed, the unopened letters of heaven still waiting to be read. Sundays used to be her joy, the hymns, the laughter, the warmth of familiar faces. But after her husband's passing, the church felt too loud, too full of pitying eyes. Evelyn tried a few times to go back, sitting quietly at the edge of the pews. Yet every song reminded her of the voice she had lost beside her. Even praise had begun to ache. Eventually, she stopped going. They won't miss one more old woman, she told herself. Though she knew the truth, she missed them. She missed belonging to a place where her name was known. Still, the idea of returning felt impossible. How do you worship when your heart feels half empty? How do you sing when your faith has gone quiet? She watched the church from her window some Sundays, seeing families gather in their bright clothes. Children ran across the yard, laughter echoing like bells. The sound was sweet but distant, like joy from another life. "Go on," she whispered to them once, smiling sadly. "Don't grow old too soon." Then she closed the curtain gently. That afternoon, she sat with her old hymnal open on her lap. Her eyes fell on "Abide with Me." She began to hum the melody, her voice trembling but steady. The words felt like home, even after all this time. She didn't need a crowd or a choir, only sincerity. And as the last note faded, she felt something soft stir in her chest again. She looked up at the ceiling and whispered, "I still believe. I just forgot how to show it." The silence that followed wasn't empty this time. It was as if someone had heard her. Someone who understood that faith sometimes hides in quiet places. She closed the hymnal, tears drying on her cheeks. Her church had never really left her. That night, Evelyn knelt by her bed, her knees aching, her body trembling. She clasped her hands, but found no words at first. The prayers that once flowed easily now came like drops from a dry well. "Lord," she whispered, "I don't know what to say." Her voice cracked, and silence filled the space where faith used to sing. She tried again, her breath unsteady. I'm so tired of waiting." It wasn't a complaint, just confession. The room around her felt heavy with stillness, the kind that tests the soul. She looked at the cross on her wall, its wooden surface dim in the lamplight. "Do you still see me?" she asked softly, her voice almost gone. The only reply was the hum of the night outside, wind brushing against the old glass, leaves rustling faintly. For a moment she felt foolish, praying to a silence that refused to answer. Her heart ached with both love and doubt. Faith, she realized, was not easy when God felt far away. She lay down slowly, turning her face toward the window. The stars were faint behind the clouds, hidden but still there. That thought comforted her somehow, that light could exist even when unseen. "Maybe you're like that," she whispered, "still shining even when I can't see you." Her voice trembled on the edge of sleep. As she drifted off, a quiet warmth spread through her chest, not strong but steady, like a candle refusing to go out. She didn't call it a miracle. She didn't name it at all. She just breathed deeply, holding on to the fragile hope that maybe heaven had listened after all. The pain began one morning, sharp and familiar, curling through her chest like an old visitor. Evelyn winced, pressing her hand against her heart, the tremor of fear creeping in. She knew this feeling, had known it years ago when doctors spoke gently of watching it closely. Time had passed, but the ache had found her again, patient and cruel. "Not now," she murmured. "Not when I've just begun to hope again." She sat in her chair, breathing slowly, counting the seconds between each beat. The house felt too quiet, the air too heavy. She thought of calling someone, but there was no one left to call. She had always been strong, always managed on her own, but as the pain deepened, she realized strength was not what she needed now. Mercy was. That evening she tried to eat but couldn't. The tea went cold beside her untouched. The clock ticked loudly, reminding her that even pain had its rhythm. She looked at her reflection in the window, pale, fragile, trembling, and smiled weakly. "You've come far, old girl," she whispered. "Don't give up now." The words comforted her, though she didn't fully believe them. In the long hours of the night, the pain eased slightly, replaced by exhaustion. She rested her head against the chair and closed her eyes. The shadows shifted around her, quiet and gentle. "If you're near," she whispered, "I can't feel you yet." The air stirred faintly, and though no sound came, she sensed she was not completely alone. Sleep came at last, light, shallow, but peaceful enough to carry her through. In her dreams, she stood in a field of light, whole and strong again. Somewhere in that dream, she heard a voice calling her name, soft, familiar, kind. When she awoke, tears wet her cheeks, and her heart felt strangely calm. "I heard you," she said softly. "Please don't stop calling." The pain returned that evening, heavier than before, spreading through her chest and shoulders. Evelyn knew she could not fight it this time. She sat by the window, watching the moon rise above the rooftops, and realized how small she felt beneath it. Her body trembled with weakness, but her spirit had grown strangely calm. She was done resisting. She was ready to be remembered. The house was silent, except for her labored breathing. Every sound, the clock's tick, the faint whistle of wind, seemed to echo eternity. She folded her hands together, not in ritual, but in surrender. "If you still see me," she whispered, "if you still know my name, remember me." The words floated upward, quiet as breath, fragile as hope itself. Her eyes blurred with tears she no longer tried to stop. She wasn't asking to live. She was asking to be seen. Years of loneliness, of waiting for meaning, had led to this. One small prayer in the middle of the night. "I'm still here," she said softly, "still yours, if you'll have me." It was less a plea than a confession of love that had survived everything else. Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees, carrying the scent of rain. A stillness followed, not emptiness, but expectation. Evelyn felt something deep within her chest loosen, as though a burden long carried had finally set itself down. For the first time in years, she didn't feel forgotten. She felt seen, not by the world, but by heaven itself. She closed her eyes, tears tracing down her cheeks, her hands resting over her heart. "Remember me," she whispered one last time, her voice fading into peace. And as the night stretched on, something unseen began to move in that small room, not in sound or sight, but in love too vast to name. It began as a subtle change, the air around her growing soft, the chill in her bones lifting. Evelyn opened her eyes and blinked through tears. The darkness that had filled the room seemed to shimmer with a faint glow. It wasn't from any lamp or candle, but something else, something alive. Her breath caught in her throat. "Is that you?" she whispered. The warmth deepened, wrapping around her like a blanket of light. She felt her heart steady, the pain easing with each breath. There were no words, no booming voice, only presence, a tenderness that filled the air, brushing against her skin like sunlight through lace. She had spent so long speaking to silence. Now, silence itself was speaking back. She tried to rise, but couldn't. It didn't matter. The presence filled the room so fully that movement seemed unnecessary. "You heard me," she said, voice trembling. "After all this time." Her tears came freely, yet they felt cleansing, not heavy. For the first time in years, she wasn't praying toward heaven. Heaven had come to her. Every sorrow she had carried, every night she had spent in solitude, seemed to melt into that light. She saw flashes of her life, her husband's smile, the laughter of her youth, the kindness she had given to others. None of it was lost. It all lived here, gathered in this warmth that felt both divine and familiar. She placed her hand over her heart and closed her eyes. The light pulsed softly in rhythm with her breath. "You remembered me," she said, barely audible. The words were not a question, they were truth. And as the glow brightened gently around her, Evelyn wept, not in sorrow, but in gratitude too deep for words. The next moments felt timeless. The light filled every corner, golden and calm, as though heaven itself had chosen to rest there. Evelyn could see nothing clearly, yet she saw everything that mattered. Her pain was gone. Her breath was easy. The walls that once felt confining now glowed with gentle warmth. This was not death, it was awakening. She looked toward the ceiling, though she could not see its end. The light seemed to rise infinitely, soft yet powerful, inviting yet peaceful. Her heart swelled with awe and childlike wonder. "You came," she whispered, smiling through tears. "I thought you'd forgotten me." The air shimmered in reply, not sound but reassurance. In that light, all her memories rearranged themselves, not as loss, but as a tapestry of grace. Every tear, every lonely day, every unanswered prayer now made sense. None of it had been wasted. The silence had been preparation. The pain had been doorway. God had not been far. He had been waiting for this moment, when her heart was still enough to see. She raised her hand slightly, reaching toward the light. Her fingers trembled, but the warmth met them halfway. It wasn't fire. It was love, pure and steady. The touch filled her whole being, not with energy, but with peace, the kind that silences all questions. Her body felt light, as though the weight of years had been gently lifted away. She closed her eyes again, letting the light wrap around her like a soft veil. Everything she feared was gone. All that remained was belonging. For the first time in a long time, she felt at home, not in her house, but in the presence that had always waited for her there. Then amid the stillness came a whisper, gentle, low, full of kindness beyond anything she had ever known. Evelyn. Just her name, nothing more. But it was enough. Every tear, every ache, every year of silence found meaning in that single word. It wasn't the sound that moved her. It was the love behind it, infinite and personal. She gasped softly, her hand trembling over her heart. That voice knew her. Not the outer woman the world had forgotten, but the soul beneath it all. It was the same voice she had prayed to all her life, the same one that had been quiet for so long. Yet now it was here, alive, near. "I'm here," she whispered back, her voice breaking. "I never stopped waiting." The light seemed to pulse gently, like a heart beating in perfect time with hers. Each breath she took filled her with warmth that reached deep into her spirit. "Evelyn," the voice said again, softer now, as if smiling. "You were never forgotten." The words washed over her like water over stone, smoothing, healing, renewing. She began to weep again, but the tears felt like rain in summer, gentle, full of life. "You remembered me," she said, almost laughing through her tears. "After all this time." There was no reply this time, only presence, steady, patient, eternal. Love didn't need to speak twice. Her eyes lifted toward the light, one last time. "I remember you too," she whispered, her voice now calm and certain. The room seemed to glow even brighter, then soften into silence once more. But the peace remained, as if that one word, her name, would echo forever in heaven. Evelyn wept until her body shook, but the tears were unlike any she had known before. They did not sting or tire her. They flowed softly, washing years of sorrow from her heart. It felt as though every hidden grief, every night of loneliness, was leaving her through them. The weight that had lived behind her eyes began to lift. Her soul was finally exhaling after a lifetime of holding its breath. She leaned back in her chair, tears falling freely, whispering, "Thank you." The words were small but full, the kind of prayer that doesn't need to be repeated. Around her, the light pulsed gently, as if breathing with her. She could almost feel the presence smiling, not at her pain, but at her release. Every sob became an offering, every breath a hallelujah. Her thoughts drifted to all she had lost, her husband, her friends, her youth, but instead of pain, she felt gratitude. They had been gifts, not losses. She realized now that love never truly leaves. It changes form, waiting quietly in eternity. "I see it now," she whispered, touching her heart. "You never took anything from me. You kept it safe. As her tears slowed, a deep calm settled over her. Her body, so frail and tired moments before, now felt light, almost weightless. Her heart beat softly, steady as a hymn. The presence remained, surrounding her like warmth after winter. It was as though heaven had chosen to sit beside her and simply stay. When the last tear fell, Evelyn smiled through the glow. "So this is what peace feels like," she said softly. There was no reply, only stillness, but it was the kind of stillness that speaks volumes. She closed her eyes and rested her hands in her lap, her entire being resting finally in grace. She felt it then, a touch gentle and real resting on her shoulder. It was not imagined. Her body knew the difference. The hand was steady, warm, full of life. It carried no fear, only comfort. Evelyn didn't turn to see. She didn't need to. She knew whose touch it was. Her breath slowed, her heart steady beneath her ribs. "You're here," she whispered, the words trembling with awe. There was no need for proof. Her soul recognized him instantly. The same Jesus she had prayed to in silence, doubted in pain, and waited for in faith was now beside her. She felt the weight of his love, gentle, vast, eternal. The hand remained, unmoving yet alive. It spoke without words, saying everything she had longed to hear. "You are seen, you are known, you are mine." The truth filled her veins like light. Every ache, every scar, every forgotten prayer found healing in that touch. It was as if time itself had stopped to make room for grace. She let her head rest lightly against the chair, her tears silent now. Her mind emptied of worry, her body loosened of tension. She no longer feared what would come, not death, not loneliness, not the unknown. The hand on her shoulder was promise enough. She was not crossing into darkness, but into love. When the touch faded, she didn't feel its absence. Instead, she felt its imprint, a quiet warmth that would never leave. "You remembered me," she said again, her voice a whisper of peace. And in the stillness, something eternal whispered back, not in sound, but in presence, always. Evelyn's mind wandered gently through time, not as before, not through sorrow, but through grace. She saw moments from her life as if they were painted in light, her wedding day, her first home, her laughter beneath a summer tree. None of them hurt to remember anymore. Every image carried joy untouched by loss. Memory itself had been redeemed. She saw her husband's face clearly now, not in the blur of grief, but in the clarity of love. His eyes sparkled with the same warmth she had fallen in love with decades ago. "I told you we'd meet again," he said softly, though not with his lips. The words came through her heart, not her ears. She smiled, tears of joy falling freely. Around them the scenes of her life blended, youth, marriage, age, faith, all woven together by a single thread, love that had never failed. She realized that every sorrow had been held, every cry heard, every step guided, even when she felt alone. Her story was not forgotten. It had been remembered by heaven all along. Her breath came slower now, calm and even. The world around her shimmered faintly, like dawn preparing to break. She whispered, "You turned my mourning into peace." The words were half prayer, half discovery. Everything she had carried, pain, guilt, longing, was gone, replaced by lightness too deep to describe. As she opened her eyes again, she saw her small house filled with golden glow. It wasn't just her memory that had changed, it was her sight. She saw holiness in the ordinary, eternity within the fragile. The presence lingered, silent but near, as if heaven itself waited for her next breath. Her body, once burdened by years, now felt light as air. Evelyn sat in perfect stillness, her breathing soft, her heart untroubled. There was no pain, no fear, only calm. Her hands rested gently on her lap, her fingers relaxed like petals after rain. Every muscle, every thought, every beat was at peace. The clock ticked softly, but even time seemed gentler now, unwilling to rush her. She looked toward the window, where the moonlight glowed faintly against the glass. "You've been good to me," she said quietly, not sure if she meant life or the one who gave it. The words felt right either way. Her thoughts drifted toward the garden outside, sleeping under the night sky. She imagined the first buds of spring waiting beneath the soil, hidden but certain. "That's me," she thought, smiling faintly. "Still here, just waiting to bloom again." Her faith, once fragile, had become pure trust, the kind that no longer needed answers. Her breathing slowed, steady and unforced. The room around her blurred, edges softening into light. She felt neither fading nor fear, only return. Return to love, to home, to the place where her name had been known since before time began. The peace within her deepened until it became everything. Her final whisper was not of parting, but of gratitude. "You remembered me." The words left her lips like a sigh, and lingered in the room long after she grew still. And though her eyes closed, the presence remained. The unseen hand, the golden light, the promise fulfilled. Evelyn had not been forgotten. She had been carried home. When Evelyn opened her eyes again, she was no longer in her chair. The world around her glowed with a brightness that did not hurt to see. A soft breeze brushed her face, carrying the scent of blossoms she remembered but could not name. She looked down and found her feet bare on a path of light, leading through a garden alive with color. Everything shimmered with quiet joy. She took a few steps forward, and the air itself seemed to welcome her. Flowers turned gently as she passed, as if recognizing her. Each petal reflected the sunlight of eternity, gold, white, soft rose. There was no pain, no shadow. Every sound was music, though no instruments played. The garden sang of belonging. In the distance, she saw a figure waiting beneath a tree. He did not move toward her. He simply waited, patient and kind. And though she could not see his face clearly, she knew. Her heart knew. The same presence that had filled her room now filled this whole world. "You came for me," she whispered. "You always do." As she drew nearer, warmth flooded through her, not as heat, but as recognition. The air seemed alive with love that saw her completely and rejoiced in her being. She thought of her life on earth, its loneliness, its grief, and saw now that every tear had watered this garden. Nothing had been wasted. When she reached him, she didn't speak. She didn't need to. He looked at her, and in that gaze, she understood everything she had ever asked. Love was the answer, and love was here. Her soul rested like the petals beneath her feet, open, weightless, free. "Evelyn," he said again, his voice like sunlight through still water. The sound filled her being, not as words, but as life. Every syllable carried tenderness, the kind that had waited through all her years of silence. "You were never forgotten." She wanted to fall to her knees, but love held her up instead. Her tears came, not of sorrow but of awe. "You remembered me," she whispered, her voice trembling with gratitude. "All this time, when I thought you'd gone quiet." He smiled. She didn't see it, but she felt it. "I was with you," he said softly. "In every lonely morning, in every whispered prayer, you were never alone." She wanted to say more, to thank him, to tell him how she had tried to believe, but her words dissolved into light. They weren't needed. He already knew every thought, every ache, every moment she had endured. Nothing had been unseen, nothing had been lost. In his gaze, all of it was made holy. The air shimmered around them, alive with something beyond time, the sound of wings, of laughter, of life renewed. Evelyn felt herself lifted, though she did not move. "What happens now?" she asked softly, not in fear but wonder. "Now," he answered, "you rest, and you remember." She nodded, peace flooding her heart. There was no more waiting, no more distance. His voice would never fade again. It was within her now, woven into her soul. Eternity, she realized, was not elsewhere. It had always been here, waiting for her to open the door. Back in her small house, morning arrived quietly. The first light of day crept through the curtains, falling across her face. She sat still in her chair, her features calm, her lips faintly smiling. The teacup beside her was cold, untouched, but she looked at peace, as though she had finally heard the words she had been waiting for all her life. Outside, the world moved as usual. A neighbor watered her plants. The mailman dropped a letter through the slot. Somewhere down the street, children laughed on their way to school. No one knew that heaven had visited this house during the night. No one knew that eternity had unfolded between its walls. The light in the room seemed to linger longer than it should have, soft and golden. It rested on the Bible by her chair, still open to the verse she had read last. "I have called you by name, you are mine." The pages fluttered slightly, though no wind blew. It was as if the house itself was breathing peace. Hours later, when someone came to check on her, they found her as though asleep, her hands folded gently, her eyes closed. There was no fear in her face, no trace of struggle, just rest. The air felt warm, the silence kind. They said she passed in her sleep, but heaven knew she had simply gone home. And though the world continued, something invisible remained. A hush, a holiness, a whisper that would not fade. For love had crossed the threshold that morning, and where love has been, the air never feels empty again. In heaven's memory, no soul is forgotten. Evelyn's name was spoken like music, echoing softly through eternity. The angels remembered her prayers, her small acts of love, her quiet faith that refused to die. Every tear she had shed was now a jewel of light. What the world overlooked, heaven had cherished all along. She walked now among the living fields of light, her steps effortless, her spirit whole. Beside her was peace, not distant, not earned, but freely given. She looked around and saw others like her, faces radiant, hearts restored, all remembered by the one who sees all. Every story mattered here. She turned once more, as if to look back toward the world she had left. It shimmered faintly in the distance, fragile yet beautiful. "They will know one day," she whispered. "They will see that you never forget." The breeze carried her words away like petals, spreading them through unseen skies, and then, with a quiet smile, she lifted her gaze again. The presence was before her, endless and near, brighter than any dawn. "Welcome home," he said, his voice like the heart of every prayer she'd ever spoken. She bowed her head in joy, and light wrapped her like embrace. Evelyn had been forgotten by the world, but never by heaven. In the mind of God, she had always been remembered, always been loved, and in that remembrance she became eternal.